Welcome to the Spoiler Alert podcast. My name is Nate, and today I will be reviewing Rome Open City by Roberto Rossellini. Rome Open City is the first of a trilogy from Roberto Rossellini that were made during and immediately after fascist occupation occurred in Europe during World War II. Rome Open City specifically focuses on the city of Rome and the anti-fascist movement within the city. So even though there was control by Mussolini still to this point, where these films are set anyway, there's a huge anti-fascist sympathy going on throughout the country because they don't like the way things are going on. They don't approve of Mussolini or his allegiance with the SS. Rome Open City was released in 1945, followed by Paisan in 1945 as well, and Germany Year Zero in 1948. All discuss specifically different things about the liberation period. So just before liberation and during and after, in different locations in Europe. Rome Open City is probably the most famous of the three, possibly the best. All of them are very good in their own right, but we're going to kick it off with Roberto Rossellini's Rome Open City. Before we get started, please follow, give us a like on YouTube. On that note, let's get started. In the first opening scenes of Rome Open City, the SS is searching the home set in 1944 of Giorgio Manfredi. Now, Giorgio is a communist rebel. So communism and fascism were kind of dueling things during World War II. A lot of people don't phrase it that way because communism has like this dirty word to it, but those were the opposing forces. So like Soviet Union didn't get along with Nazi Germany. They were both very territorial, but did things that people don't like, but politically speaking, very different. The examples with Spain as well, if you wanted to watch our Devil's Backbone video, there's a good bit of that, as well as like Pan's Labyrinth and stuff like that. So Giorgio is this communist rebel that is kind of a symbol of hope for the liberation of Italy, and kind of a spy and doing this and doing that, making himself useful for the cause. There are multiple like character lines in this story as well that are relating but not necessarily directly related, and one is Pina. We first see her in a bread line, which is very Rossellini for this trilogy, is bread lines and damaged architecture and bombed cities, and it's all very cheery. Pina is engaged to Francesco and is a mother of one and also pregnant. Pina and Giorgio contact Don Pietro, who is a priest that is sympathetic to the resistance. All these things, just being a kid, really, but really not a very happy future at this point. A whole generation of Europeans were raised in this time of total destabilization, and both economically, socially, in every way. Wartime really tore apart Europe, and they had to restart everybody. Everybody had to do it. And some places it was worse than others. This is really Italy's story. The priest and Giorgio make plans as far as things they want to do for the resistance while keeping him in hiding. Pina's sister, Laura, is friends with Marina, who is Giorgio's girlfriend, that they're trying to reconnect a little bit. So that's kind of where the friendship relation is between Pina and Giorgio. Now, throughout this movie, you'll notice, and there's not a ton that I have to speak for when it comes to the dialogue, like the witty, like, you know, it's not like a Tarantino, like witty dialogue like that, which doesn't make it bad. It's really authentic dialogue. It's very of the streets. It's very a common man dialogue. And that they capture really well. And they point out in so doing that it's everyone's war. That even like a housewife or an elderly grandparent or a little kid, although not directly fighting the war with, you know, guns and this and that, they're trooping through the war themselves by surviving. It's revealed that like the priest is a very forgiving one that maybe you wouldn't have actually expected to see in 1940s Italy, because they were a little more strict back then, especially under Mussolini. But this priest, you can tell, has sympathy to people that are in need, that don't necessarily fall in line with his beliefs exactly. He's still open to helping people and wants to help people. One of those few selfless characters that you find in movies. Bombing can be heard near all the households and apartments. Some kids were outside during the bombing and ended up getting yelled at because they were just out there being kids, you know, going past their time to play. But when there's a bombing, then it becomes a whole thing. Pina and Francesco are now scheduled to be married. They have their plans underway and they have hope for the future. There's a really great scene by the staircase where they fawn over what the future could bring them, and, you know, that they can get out of this, you know, time of violence and pain, really. But the SS is on Giorgio's trail, and they know about the wedding. So they know that Giorgio is probably going to try to attend the wedding, and that's how they're going to get him. Germans and Italian fascists surround the building that they're in. Giorgio gets away, but Francesco is captured and thrown into the back of a truck and started to get driven off. Pina gives chase, and she is shot dead by the SS. A rebel ambush eventually frees Francesco anyway, and that's the end of part 1. Now the beginning of part 2, kick it off with some lambs. So I think the lamb thing is kind of symbolic of lambs being sent out to slaughter, because we see these lambs later on dead, which is kind of fucked up. But Giorgio and Marina reunite, which is a nice little thing for the audience, you know, a little breadcrumb of hope that they just stomp directly into the ground. Marina had to resort to prostitution in her time to make, you know, a living for herself, because Giorgio's gone. You know, she had to do something. The priest Pietro hides Giorgio, and Francesco says goodbye to the family. And Marcello, the little boy, gives him a scarf. So these very human moments that like sound kind of goofy when I regurgitate them, but when you see it visually, it says everything you need it to say. And it's a kind of visual style that is very underutilized these days, because they always have to explain everything. You know, I think a movie can be accepting and, you know, informative without explaining itself. You know what I mean? I think overall, I think there's a lot that could be gained from studying movies like this. And then there's a raid and everyone is captured except for Francesco. The SS has 10 hours to get the three of them to talk. Now, Marina, in her time of prostitution and everything too, is also hooked on drugs. Giorgio doesn't like that. There's like a pushback and a fight over how she made her choices. Because of that argument, Marina actually sells out Giorgio and Francesco. Now, Francesco, Giorgio, the priest, and then a different Austrian priest are all ambushed. But Francesco lags behind so he doesn't get captured, but everyone else does. And for it, Marina is rewarded a fur coat and more drugs. So that's pretty dark. And Francesco would later on hang himself because he's just escaped doom so many times, and doesn't have a lot to live for at this point with Pina being gone. Like I said, the SS has 10 hours to make these three talk. Giorgio is interrogated and tortured in doing so. The priest is kind of taken to the side and spoken to while Giorgio is being tortured, and the priest is forced to watch Giorgio getting tortured, all the while that the main German officer, Bergman, is interrogating the priest. The German officer brings up things like, Giorgio is an atheist. He's at odds with your beliefs. He's at odds with the church. And that's when probably the best scene of the film is when the priest says that those who fight for justice and liberty walk with the Lord. So basically, you can live a godly life without believing in God or without having a religion. I think that's pretty important in the world. Giorgio keeps getting tortured. The German officer argues with another officer about Nazi ethics, but Giorgio won't talk this whole time. He's getting burned, he's getting cut, getting tortured, and then he gets tortured to the point that he dies in the priest's arms. Pietro, the priest, is taken to the middle of this opening and set on a chair where he says his last words, which are, "It's not hard to die a good death. It's hard to live a good life." And with that, he's executed, shot in the back, and then kids watch the priest as he dies and return to Rome. That's the end of the film. This movie was greatly influential in the Italian neo-realist movement. So that includes movies like Bicycle Thieves, obviously anything that Rossellini did, some stuff you could consider for Fellini, because Fellini actually was one of the co-writers of this film. Federico Fellini and Roberto Rossellini joined forces for this one. Obviously, Fellini would become much more stylish and, much more, I would say, a lot more levels to what he does, where Fellini ends up being a little more psychological, a little more expressionistic, a little more dreamlike, I would say his movies are. Whereas Rossellini's tend to be brutally authentic, unquestionably real. And that's really what this movie did, is it took a picture of a moment in time. This movie is really for people that died and were affected by wars that don't get glory when it's probably necessary, and also just have a lot taken away from them even without much of a positive impact in the end. Because Giorgio probably did a lot of good for people by not talking, but he doesn't get to see that pay off. You know what I mean? He didn't get to see peacetime. A lot of kids, a lot of families made a lot of sacrifices in that time and other times, because this functions in such a real way that it could be placed in almost any war. A lot of those people that did a lot to create peace never got to see that peace. And that's what this movie is kind of for, I believe. As far as things I would recommend that would go along with it, of course, the entire War trilogy. This is the Criterion version. It's very nice. We have Rome Open City, Paisan, which is going to be the next one, and Germany Year Zero. It's a really good box set too. Should probably get that. Another recommendation I would have is going to be Bicycle Thieves. because that really kicked off the neo-realist movement in Italy, which neorealism, if you want to, boil it down, is kind of like authentic street dialogue. That's part of it. Authentic street stories, stories that can imprint directly into other societies. So like in Marina's case, down on her luck, like prostitute and drug addict exist everywhere. So like it's, that storyline of betrayal and trust and, dignity, like all these things, and loss, and all these things are super transferable to other cities. And because Rome open city, that just means it's Rome. There's a lot of other places that it can be touched on. As far as a rating, I give this one the highest rating of the War trilogy. I give it 5 stars. It went a long way to changing the game when it comes to Italian neorealism, and it holds up. This is an excellent movie. It's one of the greatest, and I think it's gonna only hold up more over time. With that, I'm Nate with the Spoiler Alert Podcast. I'll catch you next time with Pies On. Have a great day, everybody.